I'm very excited. I'm very excited. I'm still, slightly less in shock than I was that I'm still in it, because I didn't expect to be cast the first time round. So the fifth time round, it's a joy and a privilege, and it is one of the happiest sets that I've ever worked on. And so yeah, I'm excited that this story is going to be out and people will be able to see it. With this series, I think it's very much unlike the previous ones for a couple of reasons. I think one is that it follows on from the events of season 4. So Sonny Khan, the character I play, is in a very different place than he's ever been in these series, and in a much more fragile and emotional state. He's always been a rock and a steady Eddie across these stories, and this time he's not. So he's in a different place. He's working with somebody new, which he hasn't had to do before, a new superior. That puts him in a very different place from where he was working with somebody that he loved and had a very kind of strong and stable and ongoing and healthy relationship with. Now it's somebody completely new and very different to what he was used to. And I think also in terms of the suspects, I think unlike the previous series, this one has the widest range of ages across any of the previous series. In the previous series, the crime was committed at a particular time, and that almost dictated what the ages, the rough ages of the suspects were. On this one, that doesn't apply, and that's different. Chris has set this in our world, in a world that we recognise, and in that world we recognise, when we have suffered something as, fundamental and traumatising as grief, we still have to get up and go to work the next day, and I think that's where he's placed Sonny, and in the same, which I thought was very bold of him when he had the idea, which was that Sonny would somehow mirror what the audience might be feeling about Cassie no longer being, part of this team and part of this setup. And I think Sonny's going through that. And so, grief, has long tentacles and affects every part of your day. And yet you can somehow still, because you have to function. So I think that's an interesting place for Sonny to be. Yeah, I think, because I think we discovered that Jess has arrived with her own issues that she's dealing with, that were suddenly thrust upon her. And Sonny doesn't know that. He's just dealing with somebody who, again, through the fog of being overwhelmed with, your personal life and issues and stuff you're dealing with, is expressing herself in a very specific way that he is not used to and he doesn't particularly like. And so that, again, and Sonny, I don't think is, or can be, or feels that he can be open with Jess, this new person who's come in, about what he's processing, because I don't think he's absolutely sure, because I think, losing Cassie for Sonny was not just, it was not just a friend, it wasn't just a colleague, it was somebody who was a confidant, it was, somebody that he could rely on and count on, and processing all of that, I think, is quite hard, especially if in that environment somebody seems to have come in to seemingly take her place. And I think it's a good observation that he wouldn't have, he doesn't take that job, doesn't take Cassie's job, partly because he doesn't know he wants to step into Cassie's shoes. And also he doesn't quite know where, he's trying to make all these decisions through that mist of grief, the veil of grief. So, and all the decisions and his initial relationships or bonding with Jess is through that same mist for him. There's body parts that are found in a chimney in a house that's being renovated in the west of London. And what then kind of follows is kind of what's followed before, which is about, who is this person? And crucially, when did they die? And from then on, I think it is about piecing those, those any clues they have together to kind of find out who this person was, and and we've met these, you know, disparate characters that are somehow connected, that we know are connected by now. We don't know what that connection is. So from there, it is the procedural as people know it, and but you know, with particularly with Jess's character coming in, who is not as enthused about these cold cases, going back as far as they do with the money they take up, as certainly as Sunny's been used to with Cassie. Line of Duty or Vigil is kind of, you know, there's a lot of action, there's a lot of kind of plot that's motoring along. You know, it's like kind of sitting in a bobsleigh and then being pushed down into the kind of bobsleigh thing, which is great fun, you know. And I think Unforgotten has always been something that's been focused on something different. And I think, you know, with Chris Lang's stuff, I think it's about reflecting a society that we live in, and so therefore we recognise. So I think that, you know, Cassie and Sunny's relationship, for instance, was one that you'll find. It's a couple of people who are friends. I mean, they get on. There's no big tensions. They work stuff out. You know, it's and you know, the police in Unforgotten don't see themselves as heroic or tragic or, you know, anything like that. It's their job, and this is what they're doing. And so it's a very kind of unassuming world they're in. You know, there aren't guns, there aren't flash cars, there, you know, no helicopters. You know, there's, you know, all that kind of stuff. No submarines, which I must speak to Chris Lang about. I think we should have a submarine at least. But you know, but those shows are different shows, and I kind of love watching them because there's an energy to those, which is very different to Unforgotten. You know, and so I think with this, as you know, people have rightly pointed out, it's closer in tone to something like 24 Hours in Police Custody, where you see real people who are kind of quite quiet, just, you know, making their notes and looking up stuff. But I think that the tension comes from, you know, this closing noose around people who are not necessarily evil. These are, you know, but in most of the cases, it's people who've did one bad thing. You know, I'd imagine that prisons where people have kind of, you know, horrifically committed murder are full of people who've maybe done it once, you know, and it was either a moment of madness, or it was, you know, or whatever reason they may have justified it, but it was an incident, as opposed to the kind of the serial killer type, you know, setup, or the, you know, some sort of hidden cabal of people that are kind of doing stuff. I think that's less likely. I may be wrong about that, but I think that's less likely. So, you know, most people who commit crimes, it tends to be, particularly something as final as murder, I think it tends to be one-offs. And I think that tends to be the case in Chris's work as well.
Yes, more grounded.
In a society that we recognise, I think, you know. I think the other shows, you know, particularly like Line of Duty, I think, which is great. I mean, there's such a charismatic bunch of actors, is that it is in a slightly fantastical, heightened world to the one that I live in, you know, and it's quite exciting to go there. I think if they enjoyed the previous four, then they'll get, you know, the same kind of world that they got before. I think Sinéad Keenan coming in, Sinéad is brilliant. I mean, outstanding. I mean, I've kind of watched 4 of the episodes actually, and I think she's just fabulous. And, you know, I mean, I'm incredibly lucky that I've got to work yet again with an incredibly talented and grounded and fun, you know, co-actor and woman. It's kind of, you know, she's absolutely brilliant. And I think that, you know, but also I think, you know, Sunny is taken into a slightly different direction. He's taken to a slightly different place in this, which I don't think we've seen before. That's where the story has led him this time. I mean, I got to go to Paris.
That's a spoiler for me. You didn't do that in episode 1.
No, I didn't do that in episode 1, but I'm telling you, you know, with pictures out on social media of us in Paris, so I can tell you that I go to Paris. And, you know, come on, who wouldn't want to just see me? I'm not talking about the character. Me in Paris. Come on.
Big travel. That was it.
That's it. So yeah, I think it's, you know, again, I think it's another aspect of the society that we recognise that Chris has written about, and again with layers and compassion and observation, as he's done before.